She left everything for the millionaire. But he broke her heart publicly. Welcome to another heartwarming journey on Alcot Stories, where love, redemption, and unforgettable moments come alive. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an emotional twist, heart-pounding romance, or soul-stirring story. Get comfortable, grab some tissues, and dive into this beautiful tale of love. I promise it will stay with you long after the video ends. We'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching this story from? Let us know in the comments below. Your support means the world to us, and we can't wait to read all your thoughts and stories. The city was drowned in a quiet storm that afternoon. Rain falling in rhythmic whispers against the pavements, windows fogged with mist, and umbrellas blooming like flowers across sidewalks. Somewhere in the heart of the bustling downtown area, tucked between a pawnshop and a laundromat, stood a tiny tuck shop that had seen better days. Inside, the aroma of fried snacks and brewing tea filled the air. The faint hum of a dusty radio played an old jazz tune in the background. And behind the counter stood Laila, a radiant, brown-skinned young woman who seemed out of place in her humble surroundings. Her beauty wasn't just in her physical form, though her curvy figure, deep brown eyes, and thick, intricately braided hair turned heads, but in the grace of how she carried her burdens without bitterness. Laila's smile had a way of making the ordinary feel extraordinary. Her laugh, though rarely heard, could light up the gloom of the darkest day. She was a mystery wrapped in resilience, a homeless soul who had made this humble shop her world, her shelter, her survival. On that particular rainy afternoon, Laila stood wiping the counter, humming softly to herself, unaware that her life was just seconds away from changing. The door creaked open, and a gust of cold air swept in, followed by the sound of expensive Italian shoes tapping the floor. She looked up, and there he was, Brandon Whitmore. He walked in like he owned not just the shop, but the world. 30 years old, dressed in a perfectly tailored navy trench coat, his blonde hair slightly tousled by the rain, and a Rolex peeking from under his sleeve. Known across the city as the charming yet ruthless CEO of Whitmore Enterprises, he was the kind of man women threw themselves at, and the kind who never stayed long enough to catch anyone falling. But today, he walked into Laila's shop not as a billionaire playboy, but as a curious stranger craving warmth from the cold. "Hey," he said, his voice low, amused by the tiny bell that jingled as the door closed behind him. Laila straightened up, her gaze meeting his. For a split second, time slowed. The city faded. All she could see were his striking blue eyes, and all he could think about was how someone like her could be hidden away in a place like this. "What would you like to drink, sir?" Laila asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Brandon smirked, removing his wet coat and draping it over a stool. "What do you recommend?" She gave a soft chuckle. "It depends. You here for comfort or adventure?" Brandon raised a brow, clearly intrigued. "Surprise me." As she poured him a steaming cup of her special spiced cocoa, he watched her hands, how delicately they moved, how focused she was. It wasn't just her body that caught his attention. It was her confidence, her aura. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she was unspoiled by the artificial world he came from. "I don't think I've seen you around before," she said, as she handed him the drink. "I don't think I've seen anyone like you before," he replied. And for once, He wasn't using a line. Laila blushed lightly, brushing a strand of braid from her cheek. I'm just someone trying to survive. Brandon sipped the cocoa and closed his eyes. God, that's good. I have my secrets, she smiled. He studied her for a moment, then leaned in, lowering his voice. You know, even though you're a brown-skinned woman, it never mattered to me. She blinked, unsure she heard him right. Excuse me? Brandon's gaze didn't falter. I've dated women from all walks of life. Models, actresses, socialites, all perfect on paper. But none of them had your kind of spark. You don't even know me, she said quietly, suddenly cautious. I know enough to want to, he replied smoothly. Laila took a breath, trying to anchor herself. This had to be a joke, right? You're a millionaire, sir, and I'm a homeless woman working in a shop where the ceiling leaks when it rains. We are not the same. He chuckled, shaking his head. You see wealth and status. I see soul and substance. I'm tired of plastic people with perfect lives and zero depth. You're different. She looked down, fiddling with a spoon. Words are easy to say. Then let me prove it, Brandon said, standing up slowly. Let me show you that I'm not here for a game. He placed $100 bill on the counter, far more than the price of the drink. Keep the change and expect me tomorrow. I want to see that smile again. And just like that, he left, with the storm still raging outside, but something warmer beginning to stir inside Laila's heart. The following days. True to his word, Brandon returned the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. At first, Laila was guarded. She smiled politely, but kept her walls high. But Brandon was persistent, in a charming, non-threatening way. He listened when she spoke. He complimented not just her looks, but her thoughts. He remembered small details, like how she liked her tea with honey, or that she wore her braids differently on Sundays. He brought her flowers once. Not roses, but sunflowers, because she had once mentioned they reminded her of home. He helped her repair a broken shelf, sat on the counter eating chips with her like a child, laughed at her jokes and never made her feel less than. And slowly, the walls came down. One day, their hands touched while reaching for the same bag of crisps, and Laila froze. Brandon didn't pull away. He looked into her eyes and said, Do you feel that? That spark? I've been chasing that feeling my whole life. Laila nodded silently. She felt it too. Weeks later, they began seeing each other outside the tuck shop, quiet walks in the park, drives to places she had only seen on postcards, nights spent sitting under city lights, talking about dreams, fears, and the pain of being judged. He told her he never felt peace in his world until he met her. She told him she never imagined someone like him would see her as enough. Their first kiss came on a cold evening as the sky turned a soft orange. It wasn't rushed. It was a promise Laila believed in. And then, one night after he gave her a velvet box containing a diamond-studded bracelet, she whispered, Why me, Brandon? And he replied, Because you're the only thing in my life that feels real. Laila went to sleep that night with her head on a cloud. Her heart raced, but not from fear. For the first time in her life, she felt chosen, seen, loved. She didn't know that behind Brandon's charming smile, behind those soulful promises. A storm darker than the one from that first day was slowly gathering, a storm that would soon break her heart. But for now, she dreamed. She dreamed of forever. The rain had become less frequent, but Brandon's visits didn't. Every evening, like clockwork, his black Range Rover would pull up beside the tuck shop. He'd step out with an umbrella in hand, his shoes spotless despite the mud-streaked roads. Laila, standing behind the counter in her modest clothes, would smile. Softly at first, but increasingly with familiarity. "Back again?" she teased one late afternoon, wiping her hands on a towel. Brandon grinned. "What can I say? Your coffee tastes better than any luxury brand I've had." But it wasn't the coffee that pulled him back. It was her. The way she leaned forward slightly when listening. The way she laughed shyly when complimented. And the way her eyes sparkled, unaware of their allure. He started opening up, something he rarely did with anyone else. "People think being rich means being happy," he said one day, swirling his tea. "But it's lonely, Laila. Everyone wants something. No one really sees you." She listened quietly, resting her chin on her palm. "I see you," she replied gently, "and you don't have to be lonely here." Her words touched him deeper than she realized. He began staying longer each day, sometimes just to watch the sun set beside her shop, other times just to hear her stories about how she survived on the streets after losing her parents. Their worlds had once been galaxies apart, but in these stolen moments, they met at the center. One Sunday evening, he brought her flowers, bright pink tulips, fresh and fragrant. Laila blinked at the bouquet, speechless. "No one's ever brought me flowers before," she whispered. "You deserve them every day," Brandon replied, brushing her fingers as he handed them over. That touch lingered, soft but electric, like a secret promise shared between their skin. They started going for long walks together, away from the bustle of the city. Brandon once took her to a quiet spot by the lake, where they sat on a bench and watched the ripples. The air was cool, but his jacket around her shoulders made it warm. "Sometimes," he murmured, "I wonder what life would have been like if I were born poor." She chuckled. "Maybe you would have been my neighbor in the shelter." He laughed too, but his eyes never left hers. Then came the gifts. It started with a delicate necklace, gold, with a tiny heart-shaped pendant. "I thought of you when I saw it," he said, placing it gently around her neck. Laila's hands trembled as she touched it. "Brandon, I can't accept this." "You can," he insisted, "and you will. I want you to know how special you are to me." Each gift after that chipped away at her insecurities. Designer dresses, leather boots, expensive perfume. Her small corner of the world was starting to shimmer. But nothing dazzled more than the look in Brandon's eyes whenever he saw her. At a quiet rooftop dinner he arranged just for them, she wore a crimson dress he had chosen. "You look," he breathed, unable to finish. Laila blushed under his gaze. "Different." "Beautiful," he corrected, leaning in, eyes locked to hers. That night, under the fairy lights and the moon's soft glow, their hands found each other. His thumb caressed her palm, slow and deliberate. She looked up at him, unsure, yet hopeful. "I've never done this before," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. He cupped her cheek, his fingers tracing her jawline. "Then let's take it slow. I want to know every corner of your soul." He kissed her, gently, respectfully, as though she were porcelain, and he didn't want to break her. It wasn't a kiss of lust, it was a kiss of quiet devotion. And Laila, for the first time in years, felt like she belonged to someone. Over the next few days, they shared more intimate moments, some as innocent as cooking together, others a little bolder. She made him laugh like no one else could. He made her feel cherished like never before. Still, deep down, a small voice in Laila's mind whispered caution. Could love, this perfect, really last? Would a man who owned half the city truly stay loyal to a woman who slept on a mat at night? But Brandon's actions were louder than her fears. He came to her aid when a group of drunk men tried to harass her outside the shop. One glare from him, and the men scattered like frightened crows. He wrapped his arms around her afterward, gently rocking her as she cried. "I'm here," he whispered, "and I'll always be." She began to trust, slowly, carefully, completely. She took him to the shelter where she sometimes stayed, introduced him to the old lady who once gave her bread when she had none. Brandon listened, touched. "You've survived more than most people could. You're stronger than me, Laila." It was those moments that sealed her heart. One rainy evening, reminiscent of the first time they met, he arrived dripping wet. "I couldn't stay away," he said, breathless. "Did you walk here?" she asked, stunned. "My driver wasn't around, and I needed to see you." Laila pulled him inside, helped him dry off, and made him warm soup. They sat close, their knees touching, sharing stories of their day. And just before he left, he cupped her face again. "You've made me believe in something I never trusted." "Love," he said. Laila's heart raced. She smiled, placing her hand on his chest. "And you've made me believe in something I never dared. Hope." The distance between their worlds was shrinking. And though Laila still had her fears, she let herself fall, hard, fast, and completely. She didn't know that a storm was waiting just beyond the horizon. But for now, in Brandon's arms, everything felt safe. She was no longer just a homeless woman. She was his. And she believed he was hers. Months passed since Brandon had swept Laila off her feet, and their relationship blossomed into a deep, passionate love. It was the kind of love that Laila had only dreamed of, something she had never thought possible for someone like her. Brandon, with his promises of loyalty and devotion, made her feel like the center of his world. Every word he spoke was like a reassurance, a guarantee that their love was real. And for a while, she allowed herself to believe in that fantasy. The day Brandon proposed to her was nothing short of magical. The sky was painted in hues of pink and gold as they stood on a private terrace overlooking the city, the twinkling lights below, like stars captured in time. Laila, unsure at first, had tears in her eyes as she looked into Brandon's eyes, searching for any sign of hesitation, any sign of the man who once lived a life of excess and fleeting pleasures. But what she found in his eyes was nothing but sincerity, and it made her heart swell with an emotion she could hardly put into words. The wedding that followed was a fairy tale come true. It was as extravagant as one could imagine, held in a grand hall with thousands of white roses, crystal chandeliers sparkling overhead, and guests from every corner of the elite social circle. Laila wore a breathtaking white gown that seemed to shimmer with every step she took, her braided hair styled to perfection. As she walked down the aisle, she felt like she was stepping into a new world, one that she had never known, but had always dreamt of. The moment she reached Brandon, she felt a deep sense of belonging, as if they were two halves finally coming together. The vows they exchanged felt real, profound, and their kiss sealed their promises to each other. The honeymoon was even more lavish than she could have ever imagined. Brandon whisked her away to a private villa on a secluded island, where the only sounds that reached their ears were the whispers of the ocean and the rustling of palm trees. There, in the quiet solitude, they shared their most intimate moments. The nights were filled with passion as they explored the depths of their love, their connection growing stronger with each passing day. To Laila, it was the perfect beginning. It was everything she had ever hoped for, and more. Brandon's affection, his touch, the way he looked at her. It all felt so genuine, so tender. For a while, she believed this was how love was supposed to feel, perfect and unshakable. But as the honeymoon ended and they returned to their reality, things began to shift. At first, the change was subtle. Brandon coming home later and later, often after work hours, with an air of detachment that Laila couldn't quite understand. He was still affectionate, still showed her attention, but there was something different. The warmth that once radiated between them began to cool, like a fire that had once been roaring, now reduced to an ember, barely glowing. Laila tried to push away her growing concerns, telling herself it was just the stress of their new life together. After all, Brandon had a busy career, and his company demanded much of his time. She told herself that this was just a phase, that things would return to normal once the rush of their wedding and honeymoon had passed. But deep down, a seed of doubt began to grow. One evening, as she waited for him at dinner, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The table was set, candles flickering softly, and the smell of her carefully prepared meal filled the air. She had been waiting for hours, her heart growing heavier with each passing minute. When Brandon finally came home, his demeanor was distant, his eyes not meeting hers as they usually did. He barely acknowledged the dinner she had made, opting instead for a quick, cold dinner from the fridge. The words he spoke cut deeper than she anticipated. "I'm not your food," he snapped, his tone harsher than she had ever heard. "You can eat without me. It's not that big of a deal." The sting of his words hit her like a physical blow. Her heart ached, and for the first time she wondered if she had made a mistake. How could the man who once declared that he would love her unconditionally now treat her like she was nothing? She stood frozen, unable to speak, as he walked away from the table, leaving her alone in the silence. The disappointment was overwhelming, the weight of the loneliness creeping in. As the days went by, Brandon's behavior became even more erratic. He was distant, spending more time at the office and less at home. He began to show little interest in her, and the spark that once existed between them seemed to fade. Laila, still in love with him, continued to try and reach out. She called him, texted him, and waited for him to come back to her. But nothing changed. He never seemed to care anymore, his words colder, his actions more indifferent. One afternoon, while cleaning the house, Laila's phone rang. It was her sister, who had something troubling to tell her. "Laila, I saw Brandon today," her sister said, her voice heavy with concern. "He was with another woman, a young, white woman. They were shopping together, holding hands. They went into a jewelry store." The words hit Laila like a ton of bricks. Her heart sank, and for a moment, the world around her seemed to blur. "No," Laila whispered, shaking her head. "You're lying. That's not true." But her sister's words kept ringing in her ears. Doubt began to cloud her mind, and the foundation of a trust she had built with Brandon began to crack. She refused to believe it at first. She trusted him. He had promised her loyalty, and she had given him everything. But now, there was a part of her that couldn't shake the thought that something was terribly wrong. Unable to stand the uncertainty, Laila decided to take matters into her own hands. She needed to know the truth once and for all. So she came up with a plan. She would leave the house for a couple of days and visit some friends out of town, giving her the perfect opportunity to set up hidden cameras in every room, every corner of the house. If Brandon was truly betraying her, she would have the proof she needed. What she didn't know was that her entire world was about to change. The days following their honeymoon passed in a blur for Laila. At first, everything had seemed so perfect. Her life with Brandon was a dream come true. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. Brandon, once the man who held her close and whispered sweet promises into her ear, had become distant. It was as though the man she had married was slowly slipping away from her. Brandon started coming home later and later, his excuses growing thinner with each passing day. At first, he would tell her he had long meetings, but then the meetings turned into after-hours work and last-minute appointments. Laila, with her heart full of love and hope, waited for him. She would set the table for two, her hands trembling as she prepared his favorite dishes, the smell of her cooking filling the empty space between them. She longed for the warm moments they used to share, the dinners they would enjoy together, the laughter they once had.
But each night Brandon came home later, sometimes not even speaking a word when he walked in. Laila tried not to show her hurt. She wanted to be understanding, to be supportive, to give him the space he might need. But as the days turned into weeks, her heart began to ache with the silent weight of his absence. The first few times she told herself it was just work. After all, Brandon was a successful CEO and his career demanded attention. But with each passing day, the cracks in their relationship grew wider and Laila's insecurities began to seep in. She found herself sitting at the dinner table, staring at the empty chair across from her, wondering what had happened to the man who had once promised her forever. One evening, as she waited for him, her hopes were dashed once again. It was late and the rain was pouring outside. Laila had prepared a beautiful meal, one she knew Brandon would love. The candles were lit, the room warm and inviting, but there was no sign of him. As the minutes ticked by, her heart sank. She tried to occupy herself by tidying up, but her mind kept drifting back to the emptiness she felt. She called him, but his phone went straight to voicemail. Her chest tightened as panic set in. Where was he? Why wasn't he answering? Why was he avoiding her? Hours later, Brandon finally walked in, looking tired and disheveled. His eyes met hers briefly, but there was no warmth in them. No apology, no explanation. He simply shrugged off his coat and muttered, "I'm not your food. You can eat without me. I'm busy." His words cut deep, slicing through the remnants of her hope like a sharp blade. Laila had always believed in their love. She had trusted him completely, given him her heart without reservation. But in that moment, as his cold words echoed in the quiet of the room, she felt a deep, searing pain. The man she loved, the man who once held her and whispered promises of forever, had become a stranger. She didn't know how to respond. "I'm waiting for you," she said softly, her voice trembling. She had never felt so vulnerable, so exposed. She had waited for him, prepared everything for him, but he barely acknowledged her presence. All she wanted was for him to look at her, to see her, to care. But Brandon, exhausted from his work, barely spared her a glance. He grabbed a quick bite of food and walked out of the room, as though she wasn't even there. The weight of his indifference crashed down on her, and in that moment, Layla realized how far apart they had grown. She had once believed that their love was strong enough to withstand anything, but now she was beginning to see that maybe she was wrong. She had invested so much of herself into him, into their relationship, that she hadn't seen the signs, the subtle clues that something wasn't right. That night, as she lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, she felt a growing sense of dread. The love she had once felt so sure of now seemed to be slipping through her fingers. She tried to push the thoughts aside, telling herself that maybe it was just a rough patch. Maybe things would get better. Maybe he was just overwhelmed. But deep down, a voice inside her whispered that this wasn't just a phase. Something had changed. The next few days only made her fears grow. Brandon came home late again and again, each time more distant, more preoccupied with his work. He stopped calling her as often as he used to. His phone calls became fewer, and when they did speak, his tone was cold and detached. Layla could feel the distance growing between them, like a cold wall she couldn't break through. One evening, Layla couldn't take it anymore. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at her phone, waiting for it to ring. But it didn't. The silence was deafening. She picked up the phone and dialed his number, her fingers trembling as she pressed the call button. It rang for what felt like an eternity before he finally picked up. "What is it?" he asked, his voice curt and impatient. "I just wanted to talk," Layla said softly. "I miss you, Brandon. I miss us. I don't know what's happening, but I feel like you're pulling away from me." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment Layla thought he might actually hear her, might apologize and reassure her that everything would be okay. But when he spoke again, his voice was even colder than before. "I told you, I'm busy. I don't have time for this right now." The words hit her like a slap. She had hoped for something different, something better, but instead she was met with more rejection. The next few days passed in a blur of confusion and sadness. Layla tried to carry on with her daily routine, but it was impossible to ignore the growing sense of loneliness that crept in. She tried to talk to Brandon, but he always found an excuse to avoid her. And when they were together, he was distant, barely speaking to her, his mind clearly somewhere else.
Layla couldn't shake the feeling that she was losing him, that their love was slowly fading away. She felt like a ghost in her own marriage, like the woman she used to be, the one Brandon had fallen in love with, was slowly disappearing. She began to question everything, her worth, her place in his life, the love they once shared. The first signs of trouble had appeared, subtle at first, but unmistakable now. And Layla couldn't help but wonder if there was more to this than just a busy work schedule. Something had changed, and she couldn't ignore it any longer. The sun filtered gently through the lace curtains as Layla folded Brandon's shirts, humming softly to herself. The bedroom smelled of fresh linen and lavender, and for a brief moment she felt calm, even happy. Despite the recent distance between them, she still clung to hope. She believed in love. Their love. She believed that things would go back to the way they were. That Brandon was just under stress. She was determined to be patient, to stay strong, to fight for their marriage. Then her phone rang. It buzzed loudly on the nightstand, interrupting the silence of the room. She glanced at the screen. It was her sister, Yasmin. A warm smile crossed her face as she picked up. "Hey, Yas, I was just thinking of calling you." "Laila," Yasmin interrupted, her voice tight, almost shaking. I wasn't sure if I should call, but you need to hear this." Layla immediately sat down, heart beginning to thud. "What's wrong?" "I saw Brandon," Yasmin whispered. "He was with another woman. A white woman. They were at that luxury jewelry store downtown, the one on 5th. Layla, they weren't just shopping. They looked close, very close. He bought her something expensive. They were laughing. I watched him put his hand on her back like they were a couple. Laila froze. The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. For a moment, she couldn't even process the words. "No," she finally whispered, standing up as her pulse roared in her ears. "Number. You're wrong. That's not possible. You're mistaken." "I'm not," Yasmin said softly. "I swear to you, it was him. I didn't want to believe it either. But I had to tell you." "You're lying!" Laila snapped, her voice breaking as tears filled her eyes. "You must be mistaken. Brandon would never do that to me. Never." "I'm sorry, Laila," Yasmin murmured. "I love you. I just couldn't keep this from you." Laila ended the call abruptly and tossed the phone onto the bed. Her breath came in shallow gasps as her eyes darted around the room, trying to find something, anything, to hold on to. But nothing felt real. Her sister's voice echoed in her ears, repeating the same horrifying words over and over. "She's white. A jewelry store." His hand on her back. Her chest tightened. She didn't want to believe it. Her heart rejected the very idea that the man she had fought the world for, the man who had once kissed her forehead like she was the most precious thing in existence, could betray her. Number it couldn't be. Brandon loved her. He had married her against all odds, hadn't he? He had promised to stand by her forever. He had looked her in the eyes and vowed to protect her heart. But something inside her, some quiet, trembling voice, began to whisper doubt. What if Yasmin was telling the truth? Laila's knees gave out, and she sank to the floor. Silent tears streamed down her cheeks. Her mind replayed the last few weeks, like a film on a broken reel. Brandon's late nights, the missed calls, the excuses, the way he barely looked at her anymore. The coldness in his voice when he said, "I'm not your food." The way he slept on the edge of the bed, facing away from her. Suddenly, all of it made a different kind of sense. She crawled toward the bed and picked up her phone again, opening his recent call log. Her fingers trembled. There were calls she didn't recognize, numbers she hadn't seen before, some saved with only initials. She hesitated, then clicked on one of the contacts. It was a number he had called multiple times in the last week. Late at night, around the same time she had fallen asleep, waiting for him. Her stomach turned. She wanted to scream, to cry out, but no sound came. Only silence. A heavy, unbearable silence that wrapped around her like chains. Laila stood up, wiping the tears from her face. Her eyes were swollen and red, but her expression had changed. She walked over to the mirror and looked at herself. Really looked. For the first time in weeks, she saw a woman she barely recognized. Her joy, her spark, her trust, all of it had been dimmed. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, and she whispered, "No, I won't let this break me." Still, no matter how she tried to shake the thought, the seed of doubt had been planted. It would only grow from here. And deep down, though she tried to deny it, a part of her already knew. The sun filtered gently through the lace curtains as Laila folded Brandon's shirts, humming softly to herself. The bedroom smelled of fresh linen and lavender, and for a brief moment she felt calm, even happy. Despite the recent distance between them, she still clung to hope. She believed in love. Their love. She believed that things would go back to the way they were, that Brandon was just under stress. She was determined to be patient, to stay strong, to fight for their marriage. Then her phone rang, It buzzed loudly on the nightstand, interrupting the silence of the room. She glanced at the screen. It was her sister, Yasmin. A warm smile crossed her face as she picked up. "Hey, Yas, I was just thinking of calling you." "Laila," Yasmin interrupted, her voice tight, almost shaking. I wasn't sure if I should call, but you need to hear this." Laila immediately sat down, heart beginning to thud. "What's wrong?" "I saw Brandon," Yasmin whispered. "He was with another woman, a white woman. They were at that luxury jewelry store downtown, the one on 5th. Laila, they weren't just shopping. They looked close, very close. He bought her something expensive. They were laughing. I watched him put his hand on her back, like they were a couple." Laila froze. The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. For a moment, she couldn't even process the words. "No," she finally whispered, standing up as her pulse roared in her ears. "Number, you're wrong. That's not possible. You're mistaken." "I'm not," Yasmin said softly. "I swear to you it was him. I didn't want to believe it either, but I had to tell you." "You're lying!" Laila snapped, her voice breaking as tears filled her eyes. "You must be mistaken. Brandon would never do that to me. Never." "I'm sorry, Laila," Yasmin murmured. "I love you. I just couldn't keep this from you." Laila ended the call abruptly and tossed the phone onto the bed. Her breath came in shallow gasps as her eyes darted around the room, trying to find something, anything, to hold on to. But nothing felt real. Her sister's voice echoed in her ears, repeating the same horrifying words over and over. "She's white, a jewelry store," his hand on her back. Her chest tightened. She didn't want to believe it. Her heart rejected the very idea that the man she had fought the world for, the man who had once kissed her forehead like she was the most precious thing in existence, could betray her. Number it couldn't be. Brandon loved her. He had married her against all odds, hadn't he? He had promised to stand by her forever. He had looked her in the eyes and vowed to protect her heart. But something inside her, some quiet, trembling voice, began to whisper doubt. What if Yasmin was telling the truth? Layla's knees gave out, and she sank to the floor. Silent tears streamed down her cheeks. Her mind replayed the last few weeks like a film on a broken reel. Brandon's late nights, the missed calls, the excuses, the way he barely looked at her anymore. The coldness in his voice when he said, "I'm not your food." The way he slept on the edge of the bed, facing away from her. Suddenly, all of it made a different kind of sense. She crawled toward the bed and picked up her phone again, opening his recent call log. Her fingers trembled. There were calls she didn't recognize, numbers she hadn't seen before, some saved with only initials. She hesitated, then clicked on one of the contacts. It was a number he had called multiple times in the last week, late at night, around the same time she had fallen asleep for waiting for him. Her stomach turned. She wanted to scream, to cry out, but no sound came. Only silence. A heavy, unbearable silence that wrapped around her like chains. Laila stood up, wiping the tears from her face. Her eyes were swollen and red, but her expression had changed. She walked over to the mirror and looked at herself. Really looked. For the first time in weeks, she saw a woman she barely recognized. Her joy, her spark, her trust, all of it had been dimmed. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, and she whispered, "No, I won't let this break me." Still, no matter how she tried to shake the thought, the seed of doubt had been planted. It would only grow from here. and deep down, though she tried to deny it, a part of her already knew Laila had always been trusting, maybe too trusting. She had given Brandon her heart, her loyalty, her soul. But now, the seed of betrayal that her sister had planted was growing wild, wrapping around her thoughts like vines of poison. She could no longer live in the shadows of maybe and what if. She needed the truth, even if it shattered her. That night, after Brandon had fallen asleep, Laila lay beside him, wide awake, her mind racing. Every sigh from him, every turn he made under the sheets felt like a knife in her back. She watched him through the haze of heartbreak, wondering if his love had ever been real, or if she'd simply been a beautiful ornament to decorate his public image. She got out of bed quietly, walked into the bathroom, and closed the door. Her hands trembled as she pulled out the tiny camera she had purchased days earlier, just in case her sister's words wouldn't leave her mind. And they hadn't. She had tried everything: denial, distraction, tears. But the ache in her chest only grew deeper. So now, she decided to act. The next morning, she feigned a smile and prepared her plan. Over breakfast, she casually mentioned a weekend beach trip with her college friends, pretending excitement she didn't feel. Brandon barely looked up from his phone. "Go have fun," he mumbled, sipping his coffee. "I've got meetings anyway." His indifference pierced her heart again, but she didn't show it. "I'll be back in 2 days," she said sweetly, brushing a kiss on his cheek. Brandon nodded absently, already lost in his emails. Once he left for work, Laila went into motion. She installed hidden cameras in every major room of their penthouse: the living room, kitchen, guest room, and most importantly, their bedroom and ensuite bathroom. She positioned them carefully, behind books, in the air vents, inside decorative items, places no one would suspect. The hardest part was holding back her tears as she did it. This wasn't the life she had dreamed of. This wasn't the marriage she had envisioned when Brandon had promised her forever. When everything was in place, Laila left, taking only a small bag and heading to her friend Hannah's house. She needed somewhere quiet and safe, somewhere she could watch from a distance. Hannah welcomed her with open arms, concern etched in her face. "Are you sure you're ready for this, Laila? What if it's all a misunderstanding?" Laila looked at her solemnly. "Then I'll be relieved. But if it's not, I need to know." The first day passed in silence. Brandon came home late as usual and went straight to bed. Laila sat curled up on Hannah's couch, watching the feed from the bedroom. Her heart leapt every time the front door opened, but it was always just Brandon. Alone. The second day, everything changed. It was early evening when Brandon returned home again. He walked in confidently, checked his phone, and poured himself a drink. Layla's eyes narrowed as he began texting rapidly, pacing the room. Then, barely 15 minutes later, the front door opened again. A tall, striking blonde woman walked in, dressed in a tight white dress and heels. Layla's breath caught in her throat. Brandon greeted her with a kiss on the cheek and a lingering hand at her waist. "You look amazing," he said, his voice smooth and low. "Your wife's not home?" the woman asked playfully. "She's gone for the weekend," Brandon replied with a smug grin. "We have the place to ourselves." Laila felt her chest collapse. Her worst fears were no longer fears. They were facts. Her husband was cheating on her in their home, in their bed. The man she had defended, the man she had loved with her whole heart, had betrayed her in the most brutal way. As the two of them made their way to the bedroom, Laila couldn't bear to watch. She dropped the phone and buried her face in her hands, sobs racking her body. Hannah rushed to her side, holding her tightly. "I'm so sorry, Laila," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." But Laila didn't answer. Her world had crumbled around her, and now there was only one thing left in her heart: pain. Yet in the darkest corners of that heartbreak, a new flame ignited. Not revenge, not rage, strength. She wouldn't let this betrayal define her. She would rise above it. She would confront him, not just as a wife wounded by love, but as a woman who deserved truth, dignity, and justice. The next chapter of her story would not be written in tears. It would be written in power. The room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioner and the occasional muffled sound from the street below. Laila sat frozen on the edge of the hotel bed, the screen of her phone illuminating her pale, tear-streaked face. The live camera feed from her bedroom continued playing, but she had stopped blinking. Her world, once shimmering with dreams of love, marriage, and trust, had come to a sudden, gut-wrenching halt. It was 11 p.m. Brandon had just entered their home. But he wasn't alone. Laila watched as the front door opened and a tall, stunning woman stepped in beside him. She was young, white, with flowing golden hair and a slender frame, dressed in a tight red dress that clung to her like a second skin. She looked every bit the type Laila had always feared Brandon might truly desire. The type society often glorified, the kind her insecurities had whispered about in the quiet moments of their relationship. Brandon looked happy, not tired or stressed or irritated like he had been with Laila for the past several weeks. He looked relaxed, giddy, alive. They laughed together as they walked toward the living room, his hand resting boldly on the woman's lower back. Laila's heart thudded in her chest like a war drum. Each second felt like a dagger, each movement on the screen like a stab to her soul. But still, she watched. She had to. She saw them make their way to the minibar. Brandon poured wine, and the woman clinked her glass with his. They toasted to something. Laila couldn't hear the words, but she didn't need to. Their body language spoke louder than sound. The way they leaned in, the way their eyes locked, the way Brandon's lips brushed against the woman's neck when she laughed again. It was more intimate than any betrayal could ever be. And then, without hesitation, they moved toward the bedroom. Her bedroom. The very place Laila had decorated with love, the place where she had once believed in forever, where she had laid beside Brandon at night, whispering dreams of their future. That sacred space was now being defiled in real time, right before her eyes. The woman slipped off her heels, then her dress. Brandon kissed her bare shoulder, pulling her close. Laila's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to look away, but her eyes refused to leave the screen, as if confirming the betrayal might somehow ease the disbelief. Her stomach churned. She felt nausea rise up her throat, but she swallowed it down. And then came the final blow. Brandon kissed the woman deeply and pulled her down onto the bed. The same bed where Laila had once curled into his arms. The same bed where he had promised her love. What followed was raw, graphic, and brutal, not because of what they were doing, but because of how easily Brandon had forgotten his vows. There was no hesitation in him, no guilt, no remorse, just hunger and desire. For someone else. Laila pressed her palm over her mouth as tears streamed silently down her face. Her entire body trembled. Her heart beat wildly, not out of love, but devastation. She felt hollow, broken, as if the air had been sucked out of the room. Her chest ached so fiercely she wondered if she was having a heart attack. And yet, the scene kept playing. When it was over, the woman casually picked up her towel and walked towards the bathroom, Brandon following behind her. They stepped into the shower together, laughing again. He shampooed her hair. She traced her fingers down his back. They looked like a couple deeply in love. But Laila knew better. She was still watching when Brandon wrapped a towel around himself and walked back into the bedroom. The woman slipped into one of Laila's robes, her favorite silk robe, a gift from Brandon on their honeymoon. Something in Laila snapped. This wasn't just betrayal. It was mockery. It was the brutal, shameless invasion of her world, her space, her dignity. And it was being carried out by the very man she had defended, adored, and sacrificed everything for. She slammed her laptop shut. The room around her spun as she tried to stand. Her legs buckled beneath her, and she sank to the floor, her back against the edge of the bed. Her sobs, until now muted, broke free in ragged gasps. She covered her face with both hands, letting the agony consume her. How could he? How could Brandon, her Brandon, do this? Her mind raced back through every moment of their relationship, his sweet words, his gentle touch, the night he had proposed, the promises he made. Were they all lies? Had he ever truly loved her? Or was she just a phase, an exotic experience in his otherwise pristine world? Laila rocked herself gently, trying to calm her shattered heart. But the images wouldn't stop flashing in her head. The laughter, the touches, the betrayal. And still, amid all the pain, she knew she needed to do more than cry. She needed to think, to act, to reclaim her strength. She wiped her tears, her fingers shaking. She would not tell Brandon what she had seen. Not yet. Not until she had gathered every piece of evidence. Not until she had decided how she wanted this to end. He had taken her love for granted, but he would not take her silence for weakness. As she sat in that dimly lit hotel room, surrounded by broken dreams, Laila made a promise to herself. She would rise. She would confront. And she would never be the same woman again. The sun hadn't fully risen when Laila stepped out of the cab in front of their luxurious suburban home. A light mist hung in the early morning air, and the silence on the street contrasted painfully with the chaos storming inside her heart. Her hand trembled as she reached for the front door key. She hesitated for a moment, her chest tightening with anxiety. The house before her wasn't just bricks and glass anymore. It was now the place where her dreams had been buried. She pushed open the door, her footsteps slow and heavy as she entered the living room. The scent of her home, lavender candles and faint coffee, was still familiar, but it felt alien now. Cold, detached, like a museum filled with things that no longer belonged to her. Upstairs, she heard the soft creak of the floorboards. He was awake. Brandon. The name that once made her heart flutter now made it sink. She had spent the entire night, sleepless, replaying every moment of the betrayal. She had wanted to scream, to break down, but instead she let her rage ferment into clarity. Now, standing in her own home, with tear-stained eyes and a chest full of fury, she was ready to confront the man who had destroyed her trust. Brandon emerged from the hallway, wearing nothing but grey sweatpants and rubbing his eyes. "Laila?" He blinked, confused. "I thought you were at the beach with your friends till Monday." She looked at him for a long second. He didn't know yet. He didn't suspect. That made her even angrier. He looked so casual, so normal, like everything was fine, like he hadn't betrayed her body, her soul, and her love just hours ago. "I came back early," she replied, her voice low and steady. "Had enough sun." He approached her, clearly oblivious to what was coming. "You okay?" "You look tired." She nodded slowly. "I didn't sleep." Brandon's brow furrowed. "What happened?" "I saw everything," Laila said quietly. His expression shifted in an instant. First confusion, then fear. "Saw what?" he asked cautiously. "I watched you with her," she said, louder this time. Her lips trembled as the images of last night burned through her memory. "I saw you bring her into our house, into our bed. I watched you undress her, touch her, laugh with her." Brandon's face turned pale. "I watched you kiss her, like you used to kiss me. I saw you shower with her while she wore my robe." "My robe, Brandon!" He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked paralyzed, caught, cornered, crumbling. "You put your hands on her," Laila continued, her voice rising, shaky but strong. "You made love to her, where we made promises. Do you even understand what you've done to me?" Brandon stepped back, running a hand through his hair. "Laila, You what?" she snapped. "You were going to lie? Again? Pretend it didn't happen? Or were you going to tell me some disgusting excuse about being drunk or tired or lonely?" "I didn't mean to hurt you," he mumbled. Laila scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "You didn't mean to hurt me. You didn't mean to hurt me." She pointed toward the bedroom. "You hurt me the moment you walked into our home with her. You hurt me when you kissed her with the same lips that told me I was your everything. And you hurt me every second you stayed silent." Brandon looked down at the floor, shame finally crawling onto his face. "I trusted you, Brandon," she said softly now, her voice breaking. "I gave up everything for you. My family warned me. Everyone warned me. But I told them you were different. I told them you were kind, that you respected me, that you loved me." He finally looked up, guilt evident in his eyes. "Laila, I do love you." "No!" she shouted, cutting him off. "Love doesn't cheat. Love doesn't betray." Silence followed, heavy and unbearable. Brandon stood still, defeated, while Laila fought back another wave of tears. But this time, she didn't let them fall. She wouldn't let him see her crumble. "Do you know what it felt like to watch that?" she asked. "To sit alone in a hotel room, staring at my phone while the man I married, the man I trusted, destroyed every ounce of faith I had in him." He reached out, but she flinched away. "Don't touch me," she hissed. "Laila, I made a mistake." She laughed bitterly again. "A mistake is forgetting our anniversary. A mistake is lying about not being stuck in traffic. You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. Again and again." He lowered his hand, clearly lost. "I deserve better," she said. "Better than being a second option. Better than being treated like a fool. Better than your pity." Brandon's voice finally cracked. "Please, I was confused. Things between us were..." "Were what?" she snapped. "Hard? So you found comfort in someone else? That's what marriage is to you? A convenience until it's not?" He didn't respond. The silence screamed his guilt. "I'm not going to yell anymore," she said, her tone softer now, but no less powerful. "Because I've said everything you need to hear. What you did is unforgivable, Brandon." "Laila, please." His voice was barely a whisper now. She stepped back, gripping her suitcase. "I'm leaving for now. I need space. And if you think you can fix this with an apology or flowers, or tears. You can't. His eyes welled up as he watched her walk past him. She paused at the door and looked back one last time. You didn't just break my heart, Brandon. You shattered the woman who believed in you more than she believed in herself. With that, she stepped outside, leaving behind the man who now looked more broken than ever. But Laila wasn't broken anymore. She was rising. The front door closed with a soft but final click, a sound that echoed like a thunderclap in Brandon's ears. The silence that followed was deafening. He stood frozen in place for a few seconds, then slowly staggered back, as if the gravity of Laila's departure had knocked the air from his lungs. And then it happened. Brandon's knees buckled. He collapsed right there in the hallway, the same place they used to laugh together, kiss before leaving for work, and whisper, "I love you," before bed. Now, all he had left was silence, and the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air like a ghost. "Laila," he whispered, his voice breaking into shards. It wasn't just guilt that consumed him. It was shame, pure and suffocating. His heart felt like it had been ripped open, bleeding with every memory that flashed across his mind. He remembered the first time he saw her, standing by the reception desk of his office, holding a folder, her brown skin glowing under the golden light, her eyes gentle but powerful. He remembered the way she smiled shyly when he complimented her laugh, the nights they spent talking until sunrise, the day she said yes to forever. And he remembered how she left just now, with her chin held high, eyes wet but proud, broken but unbowed. He had never felt so small. Dragging himself off the floor, Brandon stumbled toward the bedroom, each step heavier than the last. As he entered, it hit him. The sheets were still messy from the night before. The same bed where he had once held Laila tightly, whispering dreams and future baby names, was now the scene of his betrayal. Disgust rolled through his stomach like poison. He ripped the bedsheets off in rage, throwing them to the floor. Then, with trembling hands, he reached for Laila's pillow, the one with a small embroidered heart she had stitched on their honeymoon. He clutched it to his chest, burying his face in it, like a man trying to breathe life back into a corpse. "I ruined everything," he choked. "I destroyed us." His eyes stung as fresh tears welled up, falling onto the pillow. Brandon Hayes, the powerful CEO, the man who once had it all, was now nothing but a shell. No amount of wealth, charm, or white lies could fix what he had done. He wandered into the bathroom and stared at his reflection. His once confident face now looked unfamiliar, drawn, pale, empty. He punched the mirror in rage, a loud crack splitting through the glass and his knuckles. Blood dripped into the sink, but the pain in his hand was nothing compared to the ache in his chest. He sat on the edge of the bathtub, head buried in his hands. All the women, all the flings, the late-night calls he ignored from Laila, the excuses, the lies. The thrill had been short-lived, but the consequences were eternal. And now the woman who had stood by him when he was nothing, who had defended him to her family, who had trusted him with her heart, her body, and her life, was gone. He reached for his phone, opening the last text Laila had ever sent him. "I'll be home Monday. Miss you." It felt like a lifetime ago. Tears blurred the screen. He wanted to call her, to beg, to scream. But what would he say? That he was sorry, that he made a mistake. Would those words even mean anything after what he'd done? He dropped the phone and buried his face in his palms. Across town, Laila sat in a quiet cafe, sipping lukewarm tea she could barely taste. Her eyes were swollen, but dry now. She had cried all she could. The pain still throbbed like a fresh wound, but she refused to break again. Not for him. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Brandon. Just 2 words. "I'm sorry." She stared at it for a long while, then locked the screen. No reply. She had no more words left for him. Her heart had been his, but he had crushed it with his own hands. She had believed in forever, in loyalty, in love that defied race, wealth, and doubt. And yet he had chosen lust over loyalty. Back at home, Brandon sat in their empty living room, looking around at the photos on the wall. One caught his eye, a picture from their anniversary. Laila in a soft blue dress, smiling up at him as he kissed her forehead. He took it off the wall and sank to the floor. "I thought I could have it all," he whispered into the void. "But I was wrong. I had it all when I had you." He wept for his betrayal, for her pain, for the woman who had given him more than he ever deserved. But Laila was gone, and this time she might not come back. The days that followed were a storm of emotions for both Brandon and Laila. The silence between them wasn't just quiet, it was heavy, thick with unspoken pain, broken trust, and the weight of everything they had built now teetering on the edge of collapse. Brandon had never known this kind of desperation before. For a man who had built empires with just his charm and intellect, who had the world at his feet, now none of that mattered. All he wanted was her. He called her every morning and left voice messages every night. Messages that cracked with raw emotion, sometimes tearful, sometimes pleading, sometimes just silent breaths and a whisper of her name. "Laila, please talk to me. Please. I don't care how long it takes. I just want to fix this. I love you." She didn't respond at first. How could she? Her heart had been torn into pieces. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw them. Brandon and that woman, laughing, touching, in their bed, in their shower. It was like a curse that played on a loop in her mind. But when she opened her eyes again, she also remembered the nights Brandon would stay up with her when she was sick. The time he drove across town just to bring her favorite soup. The way his voice would soften when he told her he loved her in the middle of the night, like she was the most sacred thing in the world. Love was never black and white. Pain didn't erase the past, but neither did the past guarantee the future. One afternoon, as Laila sat by the window with a blanket over her shoulders, her phone buzzed. Another message from Brandon. But this time, it wasn't a plea. It was a photo. It showed an empty jewelry box. Beside it, a handwritten note. This was for her. "But it means nothing. I bought nothing. I gave her nothing. But you were my everything, and I gave you pain. Please let me undo this." Laila closed her eyes and let the tears fall. There was no denying it. He was trying. And even if her heart still ached, she couldn't pretend that a part of her didn't still love him. A part that remembered the man she married, the man who once looked at her like she was his whole universe. So, after nearly 2 weeks of silence, she messaged back. "We need to talk, in person." Brandon dropped everything. He cancelled meetings, shut off his phone, and drove straight to the cafe she mentioned. When he walked in, Laila was already seated. Her expression was unreadable, strong but fragile. Her eyes, though slightly red, were calm. He approached slowly, almost like a guilty child walking toward a mother's scolding. "Thank you for seeing me," he said, his voice hoarse. Laila looked up. "I'm not here for apologies anymore, Brandon. I've heard them all." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I know. I'm not here to beg. I'm here to tell you. I've changed." She raised an eyebrow. "In 2 weeks?" "No," he admitted. "Not completely. But I've started. I've let go of everything that doesn't serve us. I ended it with her. I've started therapy, something I should have done long ago. I've hired a new assistant and made arrangements to spend more time at home, if you'll have me there." There was silence. Laila folded her arms. "And what about the truth, Brandon? What about the next time temptation knocks?" He leaned forward, eyes intense. "Then I'll remember what it felt like to see you walk out that door. I'll remember this, right now, fighting for the woman I hurt, begging for her forgiveness, knowing I might never earn it." Her eyes softened. He continued, "I don't deserve your love, but I want to earn it. Slowly, patiently. I'll do whatever it takes. No more lies, no more ego. Just the truth, even when it's hard." A long pause. Laila looked away, watching a couple laugh at a nearby table. For a moment, she imagined what it would be like to start fresh, not just in love, but in trust. With him, with herself. She turned back to him. "One last chance," she said quietly. "That's all I can offer you. You break it, and there's no coming back." Brandon nodded, eyes shining. "I won't waste it." That night, for the first time in weeks, they walked side by side. Not hand in hand, but not apart either. It wasn't a return to the past. It was the beginning of something new. When they got home, Laila went straight to the bedroom, while Brandon stood in the hallway, unsure. She turned around. "You're sleeping on the couch." He smiled softly. "I deserve that. But tomorrow," she added, "we talk. And the day after that. And every day after. If we're going to do this, it has to be real." He nodded. "Every day, I'll show up. For you. For us." The pain wasn't gone. The scars still burned. But in the quiet of the night, under the roof they once built with love, a flicker of hope sparked once again. Sometimes redemption didn't come in grand gestures. It came in consistency, in humility, in choosing love again and again, even after it had been broken. The road back to Laila's heart was not a straight line, nor was it easy, but Brandon was walking it with more sincerity than he had ever shown in his life. After the confrontation, after her ultimatum, something inside him had shifted. The man who once lived for lavish parties, shallow attention, and temporary pleasures was now waking up every day with one mission: to win back his wife. It began with the little things. Brandon started waking up before her, just to prepare her tea the way she liked it. Strong, with a touch of honey and no sugar. He would leave sticky notes on the mirror that read, "You're beautiful, even when you don't believe it." Or, "Thank you for not giving up on me." Laila was cautious. The wounds were still fresh, and trust was something that had to be rebuilt with time, not promises. But she noticed the change. There were no more late nights at the office, no unexplained calls, no perfume on his shirts that didn't belong to her. Instead, he made space for her, not just in his calendar, but in his heart. He began taking her out again, not to show her off like a trophy, but to make her feel special. One evening, he surprised her with a quiet rooftop dinner at home. Candles flickered around them, and the scent of jasmine lingered in the air. Soft jazz played in the background, and for the first time in months, Laila let herself relax in his presence. "I remember our first dinner like this," Brandon said as he poured her a glass of sparkling water. "You wore a yellow dress and kept tucking your hair behind your ears when you got nervous." She blinked, surprised he remembered. He smiled. "That was the night I realized I wanted to marry you." The sincerity in his voice made something inside her crack, just a little, but it was enough for her to smile back. Over the weeks, Brandon joined her for her charity events, supported her career choices, and even took interest in the books she read. He wasn't just trying to impress her. He was present. He sat with her through long conversations about pain, betrayal, and her fears of never being enough. And not once did he try to defend himself. He listened. One afternoon, as they sat in the garden sipping tea, Laila looked over at him. "You've changed," she said softly. He met her gaze. "I had to. Losing you was the scariest moment of my life." She didn't say anything, but she reached for his hand. And that meant everything. They began rebuilding their intimacy, not with grand romantic gestures, but with simple touches. A hand on her back when she cooked, his fingers brushing against hers as they watched TV, a forehead kiss before bed. Slowly, the tension in her shoulders began to melt. Her laughter returned, first in short bursts, then in full-hearted joy. He planned little getaways, a weekend at a cozy lake house, a surprise trip to the spa, even just late-night drives with her favorite music playing. He wanted her to feel adored, safe, and above all, chosen. They danced in the kitchen one night, barefoot and giddy. Laila laughed when Brandon tried to spin her and almost slipped. "Still clumsy," she teased. "But I'll always fall for you," he said, catching her just in time. She blushed and didn't pull away. Of course, not every day was perfect. Some nights she would wake up crying, haunted by the images she once saw on her phone. Sometimes she would withdraw, uncertain if she was making a mistake by letting him back in. But Brandon never wavered. He held her through the breakdowns. He apologized again and again, even when she didn't ask him to. "I don't want to erase what happened," he told her one night. "I want to learn from it, grow from it, be a man who deserves you, not just now, but every day for the rest of my life." That night, for the first time in months, she let him hold her as she drifted to sleep. And in that quiet embrace, something shifted. Her heart, once broken and guarded, began to bloom again. The journey wasn't over. Trust had to be earned every single day. But Brandon was no longer the careless man she had once caught on camera. He had become the man who looked at her like she was his sunrise and sunset. The man who now found joy not in the thrill of other women, but in the steady, unshakable love of the woman he almost lost. And Laila? She was learning to love again, with caution, but also with courage. They were still healing, but they were healing together. The days that followed were not just about forgiveness. They were about rediscovery. Laila still carried the bruises on her heart, invisible, but deeply felt. But Brandon was patient. He didn't rush her healing. He knew he couldn't erase what he had done, but he could give her every reason to believe that history wouldn't repeat itself. Mornings became quieter, more intimate. He'd wake up early just to watch her sleep, memorizing the softness of her features and silently vowing to protect that peace. When she stirred, he would greet her with a kiss on the forehead and her favorite breakfast already on the table. Not because he was trying to impress her, but because he wanted to serve her heart. Laila, cautious and still haunted, found herself noticing the changes more each day. There were no more secretive glances at his phone, no late-night whispers or unexplained absences. Every moment, every word, every action was an open book. And slowly, piece by piece, the wall she had built around her heart began to crack. One evening, as the golden hue of sunset spilled into their living room, Brandon handed her a box. Inside was a scrapbook, filled with memories of their journey together. Photos from their honeymoon, love notes she had once written, and letters he had penned during the weeks they were apart. Handwritten pages where he poured out his remorse, his realizations, and his love. "I wanted you to have this," he said gently. "So even on the days you doubt me, you'll remember what we've been through and what we're still fighting for." Tears welled in Laila's eyes. She didn't speak. She simply leaned forward and rested her head on his chest, letting the rhythm of his heart calm her storm. They began spending more time together, not in extravagant settings, but in the small, sacred moments that mattered most. Cooking dinner side by side, reading books aloud to each other, taking long evening walks hand in hand in comfortable silence. The kind of silence that said, "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Brandon also took a step further. He started going to counseling. Alone at first, then later inviting Laila to join. It wasn't easy, revisiting the hurt, the betrayal, and the insecurities. But sitting together in those sessions made their bond stronger. They were learning each other all over again. And for the first time, Brandon didn't run from accountability. He embraced it. One night, after a long day, Laila finally opened up. "I was so scared you'd never look at me the same again," she whispered. Like I wasn't enough. Brandon's eyes filled with tears. He cupped her face, his voice thick with emotion. "You were always enough, Laila. I was the one who didn't see it. But I see you now. All of you. And I'm not letting go." Those words, spoken in the hush of their bedroom, became a turning point. Their physical intimacy returned slowly, deliberately, with tenderness. Not as an escape from pain, but as a celebration of rebuilding. Every touch was permission. Every kiss was a promise. Brandon made her feel desired again, not just for her beauty, but for her strength, her resilience, her essence. And Laila, in her quiet grace, let herself fall again, this time with guarded hope. She began to smile more, laugh without flinching, dance with him in the kitchen again, barefoot and free. Their love was no longer flawless, but it was real, and perhaps even more beautiful in its imperfection. Trust, they learned, isn't a destination. It's a choice they made, every single day. And slowly, it began to feel like home again. 1 year had passed since the night everything fell apart, and everything began again. The seasons had come and gone, but Laila and Brandon stood hand in hand, hearts more aligned than they had ever been. The pain they once carried had slowly melted into lessons, lessons that had taught them the difference between love that fades and love that fights. That morning, as sunlight filtered through their bedroom window, Brandon stirred awake to the sight of Laila sleeping beside him, her face peaceful, a soft smile playing at the corners of her lips. He reached over, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek, and in that small gesture was a universe of gratitude. She had given him another chance. She had believed in the man he could be, even when he didn't believe in himself. And now, she was not just his wife. She was his miracle. Laila slowly opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. "You're staring," she whispered. I still can't believe you're mine," he said softly. Their mornings weren't rushed anymore. Brandon no longer lived with his phone glued to his hand, or his attention divided between work and meaningless distractions. Instead, their kitchen echoed with laughter as they made breakfast together. Sometimes they burned toast, sometimes they spilled orange juice, but it didn't matter. Perfection wasn't the goal, presence was. That weekend, they visited the place where Brandon had first proposed. The gardens were just as vibrant, the breeze just as gentle. But this time it felt even more special. Back then, they had love, yes, but now they had understanding. They had chosen each other in the hardest of times, and that made their connection unshakable. Brandon knelt before her again, just like he did the first time. This time, he didn't hold out a ring. He held out a single wildflower he picked on their walk. "I'd choose you again," he said, voice trembling, even knowing everything that came after. "I'd still choose you, 1,000 times." Laila felt her heart swell with emotion. She leaned down, cupping his face. "And I'd forgive you again," she whispered, "because you became the man I always saw inside you." Their kiss, under the same tree where they had once celebrated their engagement, wasn't wild or urgent. It was soft, deep, the kind that says, "We made it." Back home, their evenings were filled with joy and meaning. Brandon had started volunteering on weekends, and Laila had launched her own business, something she never imagined doing. She felt empowered, seen, and respected. And he was her biggest cheerleader. Their bedroom, once a place of tears and betrayal, had become a sanctuary. A place where trust bloomed again, where love was spoken not just in words, but in gestures. A back rub after a long day, a surprise candle-lit dinner, notes hidden under pillows. Little things, but they meant everything. And then, one morning, Laila stood quietly by the window, holding a small stick with 2 pink lines. Her heart pounded. Tears welled in her eyes, not from fear, but from a deep, overwhelming joy. She turned as Brandon entered the room, coffee mug in hand. He saw her trembling and rushed to her side. "What's wrong?" Laila smiled through her tears, placing the test in his hand. Brandon stared at it. Then, slowly, the meaning sank in. He looked up, eyes wide, and then his entire being lit up with joy. He pulled her into his arms, kissing her forehead over and over. "We're having a baby," he whispered. Laila nodded, laughter mingling with her tears. It was, indeed, a new beginning. Not just for them, but for the little life they created from the ashes of their broken past, a future born of forgiveness, rebuilt trust, and a love that refused to die. As the days passed, Laila and Brandon's bond grew even stronger. They had survived the storms of betrayal, heartache, and doubt, and now, here they were, standing together in the calm after the storm, with love that had not only endured, but had flourished in ways neither of them ever imagined. Brandon gazed at Laila, his heart full of awe. She was no longer just his wife. She was the woman who had saved him from the emptiness of his past, who had believed in him when he hadn't believed in himself. "I will never hurt you again, Laila," he vowed, his voice thick with emotion. "You are my everything. I will love you forever, and I will spend my life proving it to you." Laila's heart swelled as she looked into his eyes. She had seen the worst of him, and yet here he was, genuine, remorseful, and committed. She had learned that love wasn't just about the highs. It was about weathering the lows together, about growing and forgiving. I believe you now," she whispered, tears of happiness filling her eyes. "And I love you too." In that moment, nothing else mattered. The world outside faded away, and all they could see was each other. They embraced, the warmth of their love filling every crevice of their souls. The love they had once shared had been tested, and yet it was stronger now, more real than ever before. Laila and Brandon had learned that true love wasn't just about perfect moments. It was about weathering storms, learning from mistakes, and rebuilding what was broken. And now, in the quiet of their home, in the peace of knowing they had conquered their past, they were ready to face whatever came next, together. The days ahead were filled with laughter and joy. They decorated the nursery for their baby, hand in hand, envisioning a future full of love, adventure, and all the beautiful memories they would create as a family. Brandon promised to always cherish Laila, to be the husband she deserved. And Laila, in turn, promised to stand by him, to love him through every challenge that came their way. Their life, once full of uncertainty, had blossomed into something beautiful. They were no longer two broken individuals trying to make it work. They were a team, stronger together than apart. And in that shared strength, they found peace. As they sat on the porch that evening, watching the sun set, Brandon gently placed his hand on Laila's growing belly. "I can't wait to meet our little one," he whispered, a smile on his face. Laila smiled back, resting her hand over his. "Me neither. But no matter what, we're in this together." And so, as the stars began to twinkle in the sky, the couple knew that their happily ever after had finally begun. Their love was no longer just a story of passion and mistakes. It was a story of redemption, resilience, and the undeniable truth that love, when given the chance, could heal even the deepest wounds. With each new day, they wrote their own fairy tale. A fairy tale where forgiveness was possible and true love unshakable. The end of their journey was only the beginning of the next chapter in their life, and together they knew they would face it all, side by side.